Hello and good morning, everybody. My name is Adam. I'm Head of Marketing here at the Institute of Sales Management. I'd like to welcome you all to this ISM webinar. I know you'll get plenty of practical advice from today's session, which you can start applying to your own roles straight away. This webinar, once delivered, will be available on demand as soon as you finish, so you can watch it as many times as you like and at your own convenience. During this webinar, you'll be able to ask questions by typing them into the box above. If we have any time, we'll answer these at the end. And also, please take a moment of your time to have a look through the attachments and the links associated to this webinar. There are also a couple of multiple choice questions during this presentation. I'll handle these and relay the results all to here back to Jim. So to introduce Jim, Jim is interested in what's possible. Having flown around the world competing in some of the toughest races on the planet, Jim has a very clear idea of what is possible. Drawing from his personal, sporting and professional career, Jim has seen and experienced perceived impossibilities turn into reality. From this, he absolutely knows what the majority of us are barely scratching the surface of our potential. What's available on the tennis court can also be made available in the boardroom. So what I'll do now is I'll pass over to Jim. He'll be the next voice you hear. Jim, over to you.
Good morning, and thank you, Adam, for that introduction, and welcome for those of you that have created the time to be available and live today. And if you're hearing this as a recording, then I look forward to any questions that you might have along the way. So the first slide that you're looking at right now is what to expect during this webinar, and in essence, it's really to grab a shared understanding of what is emotional intelligence. It's quite interesting, actually, because it's a relatively new terminology for a number of people globally. And I find it quite interesting that I still come across people that aren't really sure fully what emotional intelligence is. So we'll be looking at that. Also, how important is emotional intelligence in sales and in leadership across businesses globally? And what's the current environment that we're operating in? So some of you will have come across the term VUCA. I'll describe that and explain that as well. And also, I'll be skimming one of those flat stones across the surface of some of the data around emotional intelligence and why it's becoming a bit of a game changer in the corporate world and in businesses today. And then finally, I'm just going to have a quick sneaky peek at how do you build a high-performing team? So let's kick off and ask that first question. What is emotional intelligence? And typically what I ask groups when I'm working with them at a conference is I ask this question: what if you had someone that was world class at what they did, whether it was in a sporting context or whether it's in a business context, that first question of what are the attributes of a peak performer? So here on this slide you can see, here you are with your dreams, and you can see your goals in the distance. And then you've got all these things that your so-called friends and relatives and all the other things that might get in your way along the way. So if you want to achieve your goals and live your dreams, what are the attributes that make somebody world-class at what they do? Now, typically when I ask that question, this next slide shows you the sort of the scale of what people come back to me with when I flip chart this up. So typically I see things like enthusiasm. This individual needs to be motivated. They need to be humble, resilient, goal-directed. They normally are someone that has great listening skills. They're engaging. They're inspiring their individuals within their team. And again, when you ask the question back to the audience, when you look at that list of attributes of what makes somebody world-class at what they do, 80% tends to be attitudinal and 20% seems to be skill. And that's consistent each time. It doesn't really matter which industry I'm doing a talk at a conference for, the same things come back time and time and time again. So I've been asking this question for the last 15 years, and this typically is this is how it lands. 80% is attitudinal and 20% is skill. So in essence, really what we're talking about is, what is emotional intelligence? Well, emotional intelligence is just a new label for mindset or your attitude. So how do you show up at work? You know, what is your attitude, and how do you play moment by moment in each of those interactions that you interact with your clients and your team members on a daily basis? So I'm going to hand over back to Adam for this first question. So I'm early on, so I'm going to go straight into this first question, which is up on your screen now. Where do you think the majority of your training budget is currently being invested? So I'll let you take over, Adam, and see what responses we're getting from the audience.
Sure, I just launched that. So where do you think the majority of your training budget is currently being invested? There's three options: A, skills; B, technical; C, mindset/emotional intelligence. We'll give you guys about 10, 15 seconds or so to come back to us, and then we will look at the results and relay them back. Thanks. So we've had a couple of votes coming in. I'll just give it a couple more seconds and then I'll stop the voting. Okay, Jim, we've got 60% said skills, 40% said technical, and no one said C, emotional intelligence.
Yeah, it's interesting, and typically, actually, it really sort of bears the same response that I get when I ask that question from the audience. Typically, most organizations tend to spend their budget and invest their budget in skills. So it's interesting, isn't it, given the fact that actually we're continuing to operate in a very volatile environment. So if you look at this next slide, a number of you will have come across this term previously, which is a VUCA environment. So we're operating globally. Every business is facing this right now. So volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So, you know, welcome to the business world in essence. If you're looking to sell your products and services, this is the environment that we're operating under. Now, I'm not trying to freak people out here. I'm just trying to speak to what is currently the environment that we're having to operate in. And here's the thing, if I was to ask the audience right now, and it's a, sort of more of a rhetorical question, you know, what were you doing this time last Tuesday? Now, most people on the hop would really struggle to reflect back to last Tuesday. And actually, a number of people would also struggle to reflect back to last Thursday, if I was to ask that question as well. So it's not unusual for me to, you know, the pace of business is everything is next, 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 next. So it's just non-stop, and we've become addicted to this pace of doing business. So it actually speaks more so that actually emotional intelligence becomes even more important given the complexity and the nature that we're having to operate within a business. And then if you lay over the top of the VUCA environment and then think about the pace of change in terms of technology, the change in, you know, the speed at which technology is racing ahead, and us trying to keep abreast of the new technology that's coming out and available. It's just quite remarkable when you actually overlay that on top of a VUCA environment as well. So interestingly, this is becoming more and more of a need. You know, ultimately, if you think about sales, people still interact. There's still that interaction. There's still that conversation. There's still that connection. There still has to be that handshake and dialogue, one-on-one or one-on-many. And emotional intelligence, as we get into it, you'll see is extremely necessary in the corporate world right now. So this next slide is really sort of speaking to the point that I've just made, which is if you're looking to lead through the VUCA environment, if you're looking at the bottom left, you know, you need to be reliable, which is basically very much around emotional intelligence. You know, agree to what's being said and accelerate positive momentum. You know, that's all about being able to interact with people. The bottom right, being trustworthy. Again, a lot of emotional intelligence traits are required in that situation. Top left, being direct, making sure that you're transparent in your communication and make sure that there's mutual trust and collaborative efforts. Again, this is people interacting with one another. And then in an ambiguous situation, you need to be able to create clarity and purpose and direction and make sure that you empower others. So all leading to the need for being highly emotionally intelligent. This next slide is just the first step of what we call the ABC of success. So the ABC of success is a model that we use when we're working with our clients, and from a coaching perspective, awareness is king. The first step is absolutely being aware of the patterns of behavior that you run. And the reason for the fingerprint is we use the fingerprint as a metaphor. And if you think about emotional intelligence, and if I had a glass in my hand and picked the glass up, I literally, obviously, leave my fingerprint on that glass. Now, if I have high emotional intelligence, I leave my fingerprint on the glass, and that's all I do. I leave a positive fingerprint on the glass. If I have a mediocre emotional intelligence and I pick the glass up, I might pick the glass up and leave my fingerprint on the glass, and at the same time leave a crack in the glass. And if you follow the metaphor all the way to its conclusion, if I have a very poor emotional intelligence and I'm not very good at interacting with people, I'll pick the glass up and quite likely will shatter the glass along with leaving a very smudged fingerprint on the glass. So the first step is awareness, and the awareness of how aware are you as individuals when you're interacting, moment by moment, at pace, going from one meeting to the next, etc., throughout your daily business. How aware are you of the fingerprint that you're leaving in all of those interactions? So that's the first step, is about awareness. And this next slide is really just looking at the qualities of self-leadership. What are the components that you need to be effective in your organization as a salesperson or as a sales leader? And at the bottom concentric circle, you've got the knowing piece, which is basically you've acquired knowledge through your college, through school, and through your career. So that's you've got the skill to do the job. And then with that skill, with that knowledge, you then go and do stuff, which is basically run meetings, have one-to-one negotiations with clients, etc. So there's the knowing, then there's the doing, but it's the being that actually is the bit that makes the difference. The being. How are you being, and how are you showing up in all of those interactions, in all of those conversations that you're having? So it's the critical piece of emotional intelligence, is how you're being moment by moment in each of those interactions. And the model that we use is from a company called JCA Global. If we're looking at emotional intelligence, what you're looking at here is the core framework that we use when working with clients, whether it's one-on-one or whether it's working with a team. And what's different about the JCA model, which I quite like, and it's one of the reasons that it has become the platinum go-to tool for us as a business, is the bit that's at the bottom rung. There's no other questionnaire that measures self-regard and regard for others. And all the other emotional intelligence tools don't go this deep. So in essence, what we're talking about is self-regard is measuring how comfortable in your skin are you as a human being, as a leader, as a salesperson. Are you okay with yourself, warts and all? And then the other aspect of emotional intelligence, which is fundamental, is your regard for others. How okay are you with other people, warts and all? Are you critical and judgmental with those individuals? And what you can see on this 6-quadrant frame is one side is very self-centric, so you're looking at self-regard, you're looking at self-awareness, and then you're looking at the self-management aspects of emotional intelligence as well. And then, of course, on the other side, you've got very much focus towards others. So regard for others, your awareness of others, and then the relationship management scales. And I'm just going to skip you through very quickly. This is a bit of an eye exercise for those folks that are watching this presentation today. These are the 16 scales. So ultimately, this is just a sample report, and it measures 16 scales around your emotional intelligence. I've already spoken about self-regard and regard for others. So they're the two top scales that you can see in the blue. And then self-awareness and awareness of others. And then looking at the self-management scales, it measures 6 different scales that you need to have to be emotionally intelligent and be able to operate at your full potential. So emotional resilience is one of the most important ones and critical right now, given what I mentioned earlier about a VUCA environment. How can you operate under that extreme pressure and stress day in, day out, moment by moment? So emotional resilience has become very big. I'm sure most of you have, if you've not experienced an emotional resilience program, I'm sure your businesses are probably looking at how can we support our team to be more resilient in this current circumstance, in this current situation. It also measures personal power. So this is about how much personal responsibility do you take for everything that's showing up in your world right now. It obviously looks at goal-directedness. How good are you at goal-directedness? It looks at flexibility. It looks at your ability to connect with others. And again, of course, in the sales world, so crucial. And then it looks at your authenticity scales. You know, do you walk the talk? Do you do what you say you're going to do with the people that you're interacting with? So that's one aspect. And then just very quickly, I'm going to skip through the dimensions that it measures in relationship management as well. So what you can see here is the trust. It's measured at the top. It's looking at trust scales. So what's interesting here is it's not just the linear score that you're looking at. You want to have very minimal red scores here, and you want the green to be quite large. So you can have too much of one scale or too little of the others. So in essence, when you look at this scale, if you can see it on screen here, this individual has a high mistrust when interacting with others. So that will mean that they won't delegate easily, and they have a low level, which is good, of overtrusting. So if they had a high level of overtrusting nature, they'd end up overtrusting people and then getting let down. So either way, both the red scales aren't healthy. So you want those to be very low, and you want the middle score, carefully trusting, to be high. And actually, one of the best representations is the balanced outlook. So you can see that the realistically optimistic scale is high, and the 2 red scales are low. So it measures balanced outlook. It measures emotional expression and control. It also measures conflict handling. And again, a very good example of someone that's very passive and also aggressive. So not a healthy situation if you're interacting with that individual, if they're your boss, or if they're someone that you interact with as a client. You know, how do you navigate some of this trickiness is really what emotional intelligence is all about. Understanding the first step of all of this, and hence the reason when we work one-on-one with individuals, we measure their emotional intelligence and then give them, we have an exploration session. That's the first thing that we do with any of our clients is we explore their results and actually give them that feedback and then help them manage that and navigate that to grow their scores. And then the final scale, which is a really interesting one, is reflective learning. And again, by the pure nature of organizations, they're so caught on this next, and so trapped in this pace that we're doing business. Very little reflective learning is being done organizationally, at a team level, and also at an individual level. It's always looking forward as opposed to looking back and saying, okay, how was last month? How was last quarter? And it's quite an interesting aspect. So I think if I'm right in thinking, if I can hand over to you, Adam, for this second question. I'm just curious as to hear the audience's view on this particular question here.
Sure. So what percentage of your sales success is down to technology? Again, there's a couple of answers for you to choose from. A, 90%, B, 75%, C, 40%, D, 15%. Again, I'll give you guys another 20 seconds or so. And also, please feel to ask any questions that you may have for Jim. Hopefully, there'll be some time at the end to answer these. And of course, these slides are attached to this webinar as well. So just wait for those to come through. There's a draw at the moment. Okay, a couple more seconds and I'll close off the voting. Okay, that's done. So, Jim, the results are in. 25% said B and 75% said C. No one else voted for the others.
Okay, so that's interesting. So it is an interesting question, and I think actually this next slide was a bit of a shock for Carnegie Institute of Technology. They did some research and looked at this specifically, and they said that actually, so the answer basically was D, which was 15%. So 15% is down to technology, not. So ultimately, it goes back to the point that I mentioned earlier, that ultimately we still need to have that interaction, that human interaction. People buy from people. That's never going to change, I don't believe, personally. Technology does help us. You think about the CRM systems and all those other things. So when I'm talking about technology, it's all those aspects. And they were quite surprised that 85% of your financial success is due to your personality and ability to communicate, negotiate, and lead. So they, this is the Carnegie Institute of Technology, so it was a bit of a sort of an interesting curveball for them. So what I thought I'd do is just skim across some of the data, just to give you a heads up as to what else is there to sort of give a bit more of a compelling reason as to why emotional intelligence is so important right now. So I'm just going to skip across this. AT&T reviewed their top performers. What they found was 91% of their top performers were high in emotional intelligence. So it was quite an interesting surprise for them to sift through and then realize that actually these people had a high emotional intelligence. This next study looks at 181 different positions from 181 different positions from 121 different organizations globally. And almost 70% of their abilities that were deemed essential for effective performance were emotional competencies. Again, a great study that looked at this in great detail some years ago. Another one, just looking at, okay, so does it improve the bottom line? And this was a study that was done by Siemens. And when they looked at the senior managers that were trained in emotional intelligence, they ended up delivering an extra 1.5 million profit, double that compared to the group that had no such training at all. So it actually does work, this stuff. And I didn't really want to sort of go into too much detail around the data. There's lots of data out there that backs this up, that actually the return on investment, bang for buck, working on this aspect of mindset, attitude, emotional intelligence, whichever label you want to give it, it actually does yield significant results for your organizations. And again, just another further piece of information, which was, I thought, a great bit of work that Zenger and Folkman did some years ago. They looked at 20,000 leaders. So I know I'm not a sales individual, but we're talking about leaders in organizations. And what you can see along the top is TQ is the technical quotient, so the skill that we referred to earlier. MQ is the motivational quotient, and EQ is the emotional quotient. And you can quite quickly see that actually you need the skill, you obviously need the motivation, but the game changer is the emotional intelligence. So you need all three, but actually the game changer is the EQ is the bit that actually makes the difference. So if you are looking for a real reason to be looking to lean into this, there's so much data out there, and again, I didn't really want to spend too much of today's presentation looking at all the data to try and convince everybody that actually this is an important piece to be looking at within your organizations. But, if you think about people that are stressed and how much money, there's at least Well, there are billions globally being lost on people taking time off sick and stressed and burnt out. And, how do they re-energize themselves? And it is about and hence the reason why emotional resilience is becoming so important nowadays in organizations. And then I wanted to share with you how do you build a high-performing team? And interestingly, if I was to ask the question of where, if you reflect just for a moment, those of you that are listening live, and for those of you that are listening to this as recording, where do you think most of your attention as organizations within your businesses, within your teams, where do you believe the focus is being spent? Is it on looking at performance? Is it looking at learning? Or is it looking at how much fun? So there's a dynamic of a triangle that we typically use when we're working with businesses, with teams, and we ask them the question, if the sweet spot is right in the middle, focusing on performance, learning, and fun, where do you believe you are right now as within your own businesses? And typically the answer comes back, by the way, that actually it's all about results. It's all about performance. There's not a lot of learning going on, and there's not a lot of fun. It's just head down, and we need to get the next deal, the next win that next pitch, etc. So this model is a really, really powerful model. So fundamentally, at the bottom, you can see that trust is the foundation of this model from Patrick Lencioni, and we are authorized partners of Lencioni's work. He wrote a phenomenal book called 5 Dysfunctions of a Team just over 10 years ago, and it was a global bestseller as a business book. And in essence, this model is very, very powerful, and it actually makes sense. So trust, if you haven't got trust, not just within your team, so obviously with your clients, if you haven't got trust, you're not going to get anywhere. And what we're talking about here with regards to trust, if I'm one of your team members and I'm relatively new, I've perhaps been in your team for 6 months now, it's likely that I would have, over that 6-month period, developed a predictive trust with you if you're one of my team members. And vice versa, you'll have predictive trust with me. So you'll know that if you ask me to do a task, I'll get the task done in a timely manner, and vice versa. So I'll have predictive trust with you. But trust, what we're talking about in terms of trust here is not predictive trust. It's about being vulnerable. So it's vulnerability-based trust. So if I'm sat around the table at a team meeting and there's a sort of a new pitch being rolled out, or we're going in a new direction, or we're selling a new product, and I'm not fully on board, or I don't fully understand, I'm able to be vulnerable enough in that meeting and share my truth. I.e., that I'm not sure, I'm not comfortable, I don't buy into it, in an emotionally intelligent way. It's not beating your chest. It's about being vulnerable, and the only way you can do that is for the leader of that team to ensure that they're not whacking them across the head with a hammer each time they chip in with their view, their opinion. So vulnerability-based trust is where it's at nowadays in organizations. And very few, by the way, teams that I've worked with over the last 15 years, and I've worked with some exceptional teams that excel at achieving their results, but actually don't have this vulnerability-based trust. And if you haven't got vulnerability-based trust, you then struggle to the next level, which is healthy, not outside in the car park having a scrap, but healthy conflict. And again, it's really important that you don't have destructive conflict. It's healthy conflict. So you and I can lock horns and disagree, but actually in a healthy way, because we trust one another. If we didn't have the trust, then we couldn't have that healthy conflict. If you haven't got the healthy conflict, you then have a real issue with being able to commit fully and lean into the process. And again, very important to be able to commit to the project. If you've agreed that this is the way ahead, you're able to then commit to it. And then that also then has an impact on the accountability aspect. And what we're talking about here is accountability is peer-to-peer accountability, as opposed to, again, if I'm a team member and one of your peers, if you don't end up delivering on a project that I've asked you to do and support me with, I don't go running to the boss. I actually come back to you and I have a conversation with you and I actually articulate it and check in with you to see what's going on and what might be, blocking you being able to deliver on time for me. Instead of running to the boss and saying, actually, could you just go and have a conversation with Bob because Bob hasn't delivered on my behalf. And of course, again, when you then look at that, and it eventually leads to results. So if you haven't got trust, you're not going anywhere. So trust is critical. And again, if I go back to the emotional intelligence components, we look at all those aspects within the 16 scales. Trust is one of the big issues. Now, one of the scales that I haven't got in here today, and I wasn't quite sure whether I was going to have time to share this with you, but I think it's a bit of a bonus for you that are online and also for later. In terms of emotional intelligence, the easy way that we put this to teams when we're working with teams in terms of getting them to understand it is we just say, okay, so think about your attitude and put your attitude on a scale of 1 to 10. So 1 being really poor and 10 being brilliant. And what we do is we encourage people to think about, okay, so if you were playing from an attitude of a 1, that'll have an impact on your behavior, in essence, what you do and say. And then, of course, that will have an impact on the results that show up. So if you're playing from a 1 and you go into that client meeting doing and saying all the wrong things, it's likely that unless you're the only supplier of those products and services, it's likely that you won't actually get the deal. I think that's fair to say. Most people understand that. And equally, actually, if you are playing from a 10 and you go into that meeting with a great attitude, you're doing and saying all the right things, and it's fairly likely that most of the time you may well be successful. Well, you stand a better chance. Let's put it that way. Now, the model, when you think about the model, it's fairly easy. Straight away, you can actually calibrate personally where you are on that scale of 1 to 10. And actually, life's not that easy, to be fair. I mean, if you're, playing from a 1, yeah, we get it. Playing from a 10, we get it. But actually, is it fair to say also that you can be playing from a 10, you can do and say all the right things, but unfortunately on your drive back to the office, you might get a phone call, and the phone call is, sorry, Jim, but we've decided to go with another supplier. Now, for most of us mere mortals, that would typically send us down on that scale of 1 to 10, from a 10 right down to at least a 1, maybe even into the minus figures. So it's about how do you handle yourself? How do you manage yourself moment by moment? How do you get yourself back up, bounce back up, be emotional resilient in those situations? Because really, when things are going swimmingly well, it's easy to have a positive mindset, to be able to show up and knock it out of the park. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about working in a VUCA environment under pressure, and things don't always go our way. So how do we handle that? How do we navigate that trickiness? And the first thing to do is actually calibrate where you are on that scale of 1 to 10. Check in with yourself and ask yourself that question. Okay, so where am I, and where do I need to be, and how do I get myself? How do I bounce back from that phone call? How do I bounce back from that poor feedback that I've just had from my boss, for example? There's lots of examples here that I could give. Poor interactions, all sorts of things trigger us in terms of taking us from having a great day, being in the zone, and then all of a sudden a traffic jam or a bit of feedback. All these sort of things can derail us and send us spiraling out of control. So it's about our ability to be able to bounce back and become more emotionally resilient. And that's critical when you're thinking about, interacting with people and being able to engage and inspire people that you're interacting with, whether it's your team or whether it's with your clients. So there's another question just towards the back end here, which is, what impact, I'm just curious actually, what impact has the whole Brexit thing had on your business? So I'd, again, hand it back over to you, Adam.
Sure. So what impact has the whole Brexit thing had on your business decisions? As before, I'll launch this. and if you can come back to us, that'd be great. So what impact has the whole Brexit thing had on your business decisions? A, massive. B, indifferent. C, none at all. Give you another 10 seconds or so. Okay, a couple more seconds and I'll close the voting. Okay, there you go, Jim. So no one said A or B. 100% of the vote went to C, none at all.
No, that's interesting. So that's an interesting one. And again, I just threw this in for my own curiosity, really, because what I'm seeing currently is it is having an impact. And some are saying none at all, but actually, interestingly, the question was, what impact is it having on your business decisions? And I think business decisions are there is a real confused state at the moment. A number of organizations are almost a bit stuck, really, making decisions, not quite sure what, again, adding to VUCA, the uncertainty, you're not quite sure what the future might bring. So they're not quite sure about whether they invest or not in certain things within their organization, whether it's a bit of new technology, whether it's in the next leadership program, etc. So my experience as an external person looking into the organizations that I've been working with, they seem to be fairly stuck in making some of those decisions. So it's quite interesting. And finally, I just really wanted to offer up, if you go online, and I've just left my website up online for you, there are a couple of things that you can grab hold of. We've spoken about emotional intelligence. I've spoken very briefly and skipped across this topic, and it's a huge topic around emotional intelligence. There's a few things that I'd like to offer up today, and for those that are listening post the live session. If you log on to our website, the long and the short of it, .biz, and by the way, I didn't really sort of give a full explanation of the company name. So the long and the short of it comes from two folks, myself and a guy called Mark Foster, who is 5-time Olympian, 8-time world record holder. And Mark and I have pulled together our thinking around competitive sport, and of course looked at my business experience and applied a lot of the learning and thinking from competitive sport, and that spills into the corporate world, and we share our tools and strategies and our thinking around how do you build a high-performing team and how do you sustain that. But one of the things that you can look at and complete is the Team Acceleration Questionnaire. There's a questionnaire that you can complete on our website, and very quickly you can then book yourself an event, a business meeting of 45 minutes, and we can have a look at what's going on with your organization right now, and just check in with you and see what's going on for you as an organization, and see if we can perhaps work with you in the future and see if we can support and accelerate your team performance, your business performance. There's two other offers as well. You can see two books here. You can download a quick guide to emotional intelligence. That's on our website as well. And the final piece here is one of my latest books, which is a book called Built for Greatness, which is a book full of inspirational quotes. So 52 quotes, one per week. So again, if you sign up here, we can get you to agree to the MailChimp campaign, and you can get one email per week with an inspirational quote, and also my interpretation of what that quote means in today's world. So there's the little bit of a plug at the back end. The Team Acceleration Questionnaire really will give you a bit of an insight into what's going on for you right now with your business. So it's a bit of a stake in the ground and a measure of, how are you performing against some of the questions that have been put forward. So Adam, I'm going to hand back over to yourself and see if there's any further questions. I think there's certainly one that's popped up on screen.
Yeah,
I can't see
we'll
that.
handle. That's fine. With regards to any questions we will get, if you answer any, there is some time to answer some now. If not, we will answer any we've missed at the end. Again, I'd like to thank Jim for his time today in not only preparing the materials, but also putting up with me and in getting it delivered and across the line today. Hopefully we will see Jim again on a couple more webinars in future. And I forgot to mention that he was also a judge at our BESMA Awards, which recently occurred. So, Jim, thank you very much for your time today.
You're welcome, and it's been a pleasure. And thanks for those folks that have listened in and been able to spend the time to be present today.
Fantastic. And the next webinar for you guys is on the 21st of November at 11 o'clock, again being delivered by Daniel Disney. It's his part 3 of 3, social selling, top tips and tricks. So I'd like to thank everyone for their time again today, and I'll look forward to seeing you all on the next webinar. Thank you. Goodbye.